Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Tonight I'm going to tell you why we really needed an act to protect lighthouses. And to understand everything, you need to realize that under federal legislation, there is no heritage legislation at all. None of the federal buildings are protected. Even the House of Commons, the Center Block, and all those buildings, there's no heritage protection at all. And lighthouses were in that category. Now, with the decline of lighthouses began in the 1970s when electronics, LORAN, GPS started coming in. The federal government discovered that they really don't need their lighthouses. So they started turning them off one by one. And when the last lightkeeper left, they didn't maintain them. So the grass started growing up and paint started peeling, and they really didn't want to take care of them, so they started tearing them down. And they would sneak in the middle of the night, town, and they'd wake up and their lighthouse was gone, put up by an ugly tower. And so there was no mechanism in federal that we could do to protect it. Now, a number of people say, well, they have what's called FBRO, the Federal Heritage Building Review Office, that designates federal buildings as heritage. But the one thing that also, its downfall, I guess, is that it has no teeth. FBRO is just policy. It's just a designation. And DFO and all the federal departments have had no mandate to protect the lights. They had no obligation whatsoever. And so, that left, anybody in a bit of a bind. But there was a mechanism under Treasury Board that where they could transfer the lights off if a group or somebody wanted. But unfortunately, the protocol, they had to offer the property to another federal department. And if they didn't want it, they offered it to the province. And if the province didn't want it, they could offer it to the municipality. And if the municipality didn't want it, then the local nonprofit group or citizens group could take it over. And also the other problem was that they were under an obligation to transfer that property at fair market value. So that kind of left almost impossible for groups to take over a heritage light. It was impossible. And also, I had a number of people tell me, well, why don't you just get your local municipality to declare it heritage, or the province? Well, that wouldn't work because the provinces or municipalities cannot dictate to the federal government. They were exempt. So the province could pass all the legislation they wanted to protect the heritage light, but the federal government could ignore it. So back in 1999, a group of individuals in Nova Scotia met at the Chebucto Head Light in March 11th. And they started a letter writing campaign to the various MPs in Ottawa to tell them of the need for a Heritage Lighthouse Protection Act. Well, unfortunately, none of the MPs really took up the task. Privately, they said, yeah, this is a great idea. We really support you, but our hands are tied. We can't. So, this is where our much maligned senators came in, very, very handy. And I love them dearly, because without the senators, we wouldn't have a Heritage Lighthouse Protection Act today. And groups like the Lake Superior Lights would not be in a position to be here today. So, the two senators that took up the cause was Senator Forrestal of Nova Scotia and Senator Pat Carney from British Columbia. They took up the cause for us, and they were absolutely wonderful. And in April 2000, Senator Forrestal rose in the Senate and tabled the first version of the Heritage Lighthouse Protection Act, Bill S-21. It's a big day for us. But unfortunately, it died on the order paper. And under government laws, any private members' bills that are in the process, if Parliament is dissolved, if the Senate, if they have an election or it's prorogued, the bills die. And that's what happened. Well, again, in May of 2002, it was retabled in the Senate again. And guess what? The session adjourned and the bill died. Then, in October of the same year, it was tabled again, and this time we made it to second reading in the Senate. That was wonderful. And then it was referred to the Committee of Social Affairs, Science and Technology. That's a mouthful. And guess what? Parliament was prorogued. Back we went again. February 2004, Bill S-5, we made it. We were passed, third reading in the Senate. And then it went on to the House of Commons and introduced by Member of Parliament Gerald Keddy from Nova Scotia. And we made it the second reading, and it went to the Standing Committee of Heritage. And again, Parliament was disillusioned. So back the bill went to the Senate, all the way back to the beginning, each time. Well, we made it, we were introduced in the Senate again in October of 2004. We got third reading pretty much right off the bat because the senators had gotten this whole process down pretty good. Well, we made it to the House of Commons again. We made it this second reading, and it was referred to the Standing Committee of Environment and Sustainable Development. Who knows? Well, again, it died on the order paper when the federal election in January 2006 was called. Back to the Senate. And again, unfortunately, Senator Forrestal passed away. I guess he pretty much had enough of this, it was too much for him. So Pat Carney took up the cause and introduced it into the Senate, and it got third reading and made it through to the House of Commons, and it passed second reading, and it was scheduled for review by the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. And then it made it. It got through the committee. We were scheduled for third reading. And guess what happened? The Martin government fell. So you can imagine the kind words we had for Stephen Harper. They weren't nice at all. Well, October 2007. Again, it started in the Senate, made third reading in about a month, so they really pushed it through. They were on a mission. They didn't want to see this bill anymore. No, but they really didn't. And this time it was reintroduced in the House of Commons by a Member of Parliament, Larry Miller. And again, it went to committee. So we're really getting down there, you know, like this is the 7th time we've been through this whole process. Well, Fisheries and Oceans spoke up, and they had a problem with the bill. Oh dear. And they had the problem with one word, and that was the word structures. They didn't like the word structures. They didn't want structures protected in the Act. And they took the broad interpretation that that meant helicopter pads and wharfs. And even the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans told us on the side, you don't want wharfs. You don't want to protect these creosote-laden things. So we were going to stand tough. We figured, you know, we've come this far. We're up for third reading, and we didn't want to give in. But again, we were advised, you know, let them have the word structures and replace it with the word buildings. Okay. And then we were told that there wasn't really the appetite by the senators to go through all this again. You know, they were getting a little tired of it. So we got a phone call in late April 2008, get yourself to Ottawa, it's going up for third reading. Again. Well, this time it made it. On May 1st, 2008, Larry Miller stood in the House of Commons and the Act was passed. Finally, 9 years. Well, we celebrated. We went off to a back room and popped a couple of bottles of sparkling water and had a great time. And then a week later, the bill went back to the Senate because of this one word to be passed. And then on May 29th, 2008, it was assented into law. Hallelujah. Well, in that time, we had 2 years to get our collective act together because we had a couple of things to do. First, we had to designate or write the criteria in order to designate the lights. You know, what did we want? What did we want to see? What would designate a heritage light? And we had a number of models that we could go through, FIBRO, designation process. It just took care of buildings. It didn't care about what the building did. It didn't matter to them that, you know, this building Sir John A. Macdonald slept in. Didn't care. So, you know, we added criteria. You know, what did the light mean to the community? You know, what was its historical significance to the area? That's what mattered to us. It wasn't so much national significance, because a lot of the lights had, you know, they weren't nationally significant on the grand scale. But to the local communities, that's what made the difference. And that's the one thing that we wanted into the criteria, and we got that. And also, we had to determine the heritage criteria by which the light had to be maintained. And we managed to do that. And it took, you know, the full 2 years of a lot of meetings to do that. Now, May 29th, 2010, the law came into force. And a 2-year designation, petitioning period, came into effect, where lighthouse groups could petition their lights for heritage purposes. Well, the Coast Guard, Fisheries and Oceans threw us a big curve. They decided to designate every unmanned lighthouse in Canada, including Peggy's, surplus. That means that they wanted to get rid of every lighthouse in Canada, well, you can imagine what we said about the Fisheries and Oceans Department at that point too. Well, we managed to move through that. And, you know, they were criticized, especially by members of the Senate and some MPs. You know, this was just a wholesale sell-off. They were wanting to get rid of everything. Well, the petitioning period really, again, threw them for a loop. Because during that period, 348 lighthouses were petitioned for heritage status. While Fisheries and Oceans didn't really know what to do. You know, this really, you know, we threw them a curve. So, we went through and all these lights, all 348 lights over the past couple of years have been evaluated for heritage status. That's you know, a pretty amazing accomplishment, considering there had to be reports written and everything else, and you name it. Well, so far as of May 29th, 2015, before that date, in a couple of weeks, there will be an announcement that 55 new lighthouses will be designated heritage in Canada. Add that to the 19 that have already been designated. That'll give us, as of May 29th, 74 designated lighthouses in Canada. That's pretty good. Well, there are another 80 that are in the process of the final stages, and Point Portful will be one of them, to be designated heritage by the end of the year. So that'll bring their total to almost just over 150 lighthouses designated heritage. There are another 45 that are just in the preliminary stages for various reasons, and my lighthouse, Cove Island, is among them, because we have some environmental concerns that have tied that whole thing up for 5 years, or will, by the time it's all taken care of. So we will have approximately 200 heritage lighthouses in Canada that would not be protected by law if it wasn't for the Act. Now, that doesn't mean that our work is not done. There are still, could be another 150 to 200 lights in Canada that will still, what I call, orphans, that for one reason or another did not quite make the criteria, and or groups have not come forward with a business plan to take them over. But that doesn't mean that they are left out in the cold. The Act is will still be in effect, and groups will still be able to come forward and take over a light if they wish. They produce their business plan, and they can still be designated as heritage, and they will, you know, get their light. But it leaves Fisheries and Oceans the opportunity now that they could still dispose of the light under normal Treasury Board protocols at fair market value. But they've assured us that they won't do this, not unless they, you know, really have a compelling offer. Now, a lot of groups have come to me and asked, why is it taking so long? You know, we sent in our business plan and our application years ago, and we haven't heard a word. We don't know what's really going on. Well, DFO really hasn't put the resources into the program that they should have, because they really didn't expect to have 348 houses petitioned for. And also, there are numerous government departments that wound up involved in the process. And to divest of a light, they have to do what they call their due diligence. They have to do a land survey. They have to do title verification. And in some cases, they could not find any title to the property they owned. They had no record of it. Interesting, eh? They had to do a market value determination so they could write it off their books. Environmental assessments. If the site was contaminated, which a lot of them are, they had to clean it up. They had to do heritage evaluations, security assessments, and the one issue that could put the whole thing grinding to a halt are First Nation concerns. They had to check into that. So there's a lot of work. And if all goes well, it takes approximately 2 years to go through it. But we finally got through to Fisheries and Oceans and convinced them, let the groups know what's going on. Tell them where they are. And sure enough, Lake Superior lighthouses, you know, they have a pretty good idea where their lights are in the queue. Well, that's all fine and dandy, and you know the groups want to take over the light, but a lot of them needed a lot of work. So they instituted what they call a grants and contributions program, $1 million nationwide. So unfortunately, that money has been allocated for the next 3 years. So if your light has not been allocated for grants or contributions money, your transfer could be after 2017. So, you know, it's a big thing. But you can still lease the property. You can, like this group has done, and which my group is doing at Cove Island, you could lease it, 5-year term. It gets you out there, it gets you to take care of the light. And that has probably been the biggest asset the Act has, is that it provides this mechanism so the lights can be transferred over to the groups for $1. And you know that's a pretty big deal. But what it also does is any lights that are still in the federal inventory have to be maintained. And that again is really something that we really feel proud of. So we definitely believe that the Act was a success. It wasn't a perfect piece of legislation by any stretch of the imagination. Because it came out of the Senate to the House of Commons, there was no money attached to it. And unfortunately, the Senate cannot have any money bills, or any of their legislation cannot have any funding attached to it. So that was probably one of the biggest flaws. But we got through it. We met with Parks Canada on a regular basis, lots of phone calls, lots of conference calls, and we worked with a lot of the groups as the liaison or the conduit between the government and the groups, because communication from the government is generally not the best at good times. So that was the Heritage Lighthouse Act in a nutshell, and I think we've come a long way in the 5 years. When we first started as consultative committee, they didn't want us there, and they tried their darndest to make us go away. But we kept talking with them and telling them this is what is needed, and they have to step up. And sure enough, on Tuesday, right out of the blue, I was surprised, our local member of parliament was surprised, even our local DFO office was surprised when the minister announced that they would give Cove Island Association $200,000 for repairs. And, which is great. Nobody had any idea, you know, the guys at DFO, you know, we don't know what to do. We haven't been told yet. And just early this morning, I got an email that the minister has also announced that Sambro Island, which is in Halifax Harbor, and it's 250 years old. It's the oldest operating light in North and South America. Was granted just over $1 million for repairs and restoration. So DFO is listening, and the government is actually listening, which amazes me. It really does. So, you know, there will be other lighthouses in the mix in the coming weeks. You'll hear it. So stay tuned, keep your ears open, and hopefully, you know, we will have a lighthouse program and a system of heritage lighthouses across Canada that we can dearly be proud of. Thank you.
Paul Capon, I'd like you to come up, please.
On behalf of Canadian Lighthouse Lake Superior, I would like to thank you, Robert, for your dedication for promoting lighthouses and actually working with government, because it certainly, interestingly, we have a member of parliament in our midst and others, and it certainly gives a good sense of what the Canadian public has to deal with. But obviously, thank you for your dedication and for at least sticking with it, because obviously by sticking with something, you can get results.
You can,
and thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So we'd like to present you with this
thank you
as well.
Thank you.